We're here today with Jane Butler. So, Jane, you grew up in New Zealand. Tell us a bit about growing up there.
Well, I lived in a farm in a place called Horahora, which is just out of Cambridge. That's in the North Island. We had a dairy farm, and my father and mother worked on that, and originally we lived there with my grandparents, and they lived in one house and we were in the other house, and then they moved and retired to the coast called Mount Maunganui, and they had a house there, and then my father took over the farm, but we lived there, and we were quite a large family of 10 children.
So we're living on a farm. That's interesting. So what kind of jobs did you do in the mornings or throughout the day? Did you guys have set jobs or?
Well, I was quite young, but so the older children would help with the milking, and as a younger child I would run around and not really privy of much assistance, but would just be playing with the cows and being in the cow shed and just sort of just roaming around where the animals were and just playing in the dirt and not really doing too much to help, but picking mushrooms and things like that and playing in the garden. So it was quite a lovely childhood. But my older brothers and sisters used to help on the farm, but generally my father would go and milk the cows. Obviously the older children had school to go to and stuff.
So you said it was a good childhood. How was your relationship with your family growing up?
It was good. It felt like I always used to think I had 100 brothers and sisters. It was hard as a child to sort of think I had 10 exactly. It just seemed like the house was just full of people. We were sort of divided into two families because the older ones always seemed older to me. So it was always my sister and my younger brother and sister and my older brother. We were the 4 younger ones, and then there was the older 5. I had a brother that passed away when he was 5 from leukemia, and I was only probably about 18 months old when he died, so I didn't really know him, but he was sort of in the middle. So he sort of, when he died, it sort of divided the brothers and sisters into sort of 2 groups. So when we grew up, we always sort of had these older siblings who sort of were just like we looked up to them. So it was sort of like it was us 4 and then the older 5. So it was good fun because they were always coming and going and having dramas and things. And so I sort of grew up with two sets of families. Like now when you see people's families, you see them and they've got like a couple of brothers and sisters, and then they might have older cousins or something maybe. Like it was sort of like that for us. So we sort of always had that, well, you looked up to them a bit more. And sort of I had a sister-brother relationship with my younger one, the ones who were close to me, but I didn't have that same sort of relationship with them because they were sort of older, so it wasn't sort of the same. It was different. But no, it was good. It was different to a lot of families, I think, because we used to get up in the morning, just roaming. We just used to go and play on the farm and like unsupervised, just sort of took
children.
off. Yeah, swimming in the troughs that the cows used to drink out of, and it was when I think about it now, it sort of makes me think, oh, it was different.
Yeah, but very different to city living, I'm sure. Yeah. And what about your mum and dad? Did you get on with them? Were they quite loving parents, or?
Well, they were loving. It wasn't hot. They weren't helicopter parents like people are now. Like now, when I look at families, I think they're so involved in their kids, and they don't let them move. They have to wipe their face every 5 seconds. But we used to just sort of
swim in cow troughs.
Well, we used to go and just do our own thing. Obviously, we were cared for and loved, and we were fed and everything, and we were showered. But we just sort of it was a natural life thing. It wasn't it sounds a bit fruity, but it was. It wasn't like we relied all the time and looked to our mother or father to help us or to expect them to do everything for us. We sort of had to develop initiative and had to...
It's quite independent.
Yeah, it was sort of an independent thing. So I think that reflects too now. I'm not so... I can be alone. I don't have to be with someone. I don't have to... I can sort of operate without thinking, oh, what do I do now? And panic and need someone to tell me what I should be doing. So I think that was good in that way. But growing up, it was good. It was good. Life was like, blissful, just totally innocent. We had lots of family friends. My father had lots of close friends who used to come and help him do things that he needed to do. He was very creative. He's quite... he's very resourceful. We had a cottage, a house that we all sort of lived in, and as the family grew, we needed space. So he actually built a huge thing that we called the outhouse, but it wasn't like what we call an outhouse here, which is like a toilet outside. It was actually a row of rooms, like cubicles, that had all rooms down one side, and the other side was just one huge games room, like area, like open area. And each room, the walls didn't go to the top, so it was all open to the top, but there was like, I think 5 or 6 cubicles, and there was a shower and a toilet out there. So that was joined to the house by some covered concrete, but he did all that himself. And he just had his best friends sort of came and helped him. So he was very clever like that. My grandfather was very clever. I think that's where he got it from. My grandfather used to build boats, and not for a living, but he was just creative enough to be able to build boats. And he made very good with his hands. He made pool tables and things like that. So he's very, very creative. My father's very much the same. So, and he used to be able to. My father was able. He flew planes, and so he could actually fly planes and crop dust the farm, which is you let go of all the stuff above your farm to kill and fertilise and stuff like that. But when I was 8, my father actually had a farm accident, so he actually passed away. So we had to. That was when I was 8 or 9, and so we actually had to. My mother had to sell the farm. We had to move, so we had to move from the farm into. She brought another farm in another area, not that far from Horror, and probably about 20 minutes away in another direction. So we shifted there. It was a smaller farm, probably about 20 to 40 acres, and she didn't do dairy farming there. She she brought and sold steer, like cattle, and it was like a stock thing where you buy them and then you'd sell them at a good price. So she sort of did that to make money, because mum never worked as such. Like, she did do nursing when she first met my father. So she didn't, it was always like, that was one thing. Mum was always around, so that was the one thing I sort of panicked about when I was young after Dad died, was that, Mum's going to have to go to work. And that was sort of not very common when I was growing up, that mothers worked. So it was sort of like, can't even imagine Mum going to work. Like, one of my friends' mothers worked, and it was sort of like, she was never at home, and they had to sort of fend, even though we didn't really fend for ourselves, but it was sort of like a thing, I couldn't imagine Mum going to a 9-to-5 job. So, but she never actually ever had to do that, because she made enough money with that to be able to support us. And
how did that affect the dynamic of you said with your brother and sisters that there was almost 2 families. Did that change that up a bit, or did it really emphasise the divide? Or
well, when Dad died, because I was 8 or I was 9, I think I was 9, my brothers and sisters, the older ones, already weren't living at home. Only one or two of them were. So when he died, they already were old enough. They were sort of living there but working away from home anyway. So they were living, a couple of them were living there. A few of them were already not living at home, working elsewhere. So they were older already. So it was still very much, then it was like us 4 and Mum. Then just the 4 of us and Mum, shifted to a place called Ohalpo. And so then we had to go to school. It was right next to a school anyway. But yeah, the dynamics, it was hard, because for a short term, before Mum sold the farm, she had to, they had to manage the farm for a little bit. And my brother, one of my older brothers, he'd left school, but he wasn't working. That's right, he wasn't working. So it was sort of, I think he was a bit freaked out that Dad died, so it was sort of looked upon that he might have to take over doing the farm, and I think he felt then that he also had to take over the fatherly figure of the family, of the household. that was my brother Jeffrey. So he was, I think, he freaked out a bit, and he wasn't the most up and go, energetic sort of guy. He wasn't, even when my father was alive. He was a bit lazy. So he really, in a way, it's a shame because my brother, who's part of it before, younger four, he's the one just a bit older than me, Greg. He if it had been the vice roles reversed, he would have probably taken on the farm, and
He would have stepped up.
He would have stepped up, and he would have actually been. We would have still probably had the farm.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's a shame because my brother Jeffrey was a bit. It wasn't
ready.
his. He didn't really, and it wasn't his scene. He didn't want to be stuck on the farm. He didn't want to be. I think he thought that was beneath him. Like he wanted to go and had bigger plans, but obviously he wasn't motivated enough to be doing that. But so then there was obviously no choice then for Mum because she couldn't run the farm. She couldn't physically do it, and there was no. She had to make a choice, and my grandmother. There's a bit of a debate when my father took over the farm from my grandfather, which I always thought was a bit unfair. When he retired and went to live at Mount Maunganui, there was a thing he didn't really give it to my father. My father sort of was working it, but it wasn't totally his. And the deal was that when they died, he had to give $50,000, which back then was a lot of money. He had to give $50,000 to the estate to be divided amongst, like in the will, amongst the grandchildren. So that was always a bit it was a bit unfair because he didn't. It wasn't sort of, he worked the farm, so it was sort of a bit hard. But
his hard work.
So when Dad died and the farm wasn't going to get run, Mum had no choice then because some of the earnings from the farm, because my grandfather already passed away, was paying my grandmother's, like giving her something to live off while she, like, that was going to help her live. Because my grandfather hadn't died when my father died. They were both still alive, but a little bit in the will and all this stuff like that, there was the clause about the money. So Mum always knew that, so she always thought, well, I'm going to have that money somewhere, and I have to actually be able to live. So she did sell the farm. It was a lot of money back then. I think it was $250,000 or something. It was a lot of money. It may have even been more than that. And she invested some money with my uncle, who had kiwi fruit farms.
So you talked about the fact that you went travelling. How old were you when you decided that you wanted to leave and wanted to see the world?
Oh, well, we stayed at Halpo and I went to school there and then high school, and then I didn't go on. In those days, you didn't go to university or anything like that, so it was just only for really the rich people because there wasn't any student loans and things. So I left and I started working in a bank, and then I was just working in a bank and decided one day I was going to. I had a boyfriend, and he was going to travel to Australia. So I travelled to Australia when I was 18, and I came over here and I didn't really like it, and we'd broken up. So I was just working here in Melbourne, and my girlfriend who had travelled to England said, "Oh, I'm over here with my grandmother. Do you want to come over and we'll go travelling?" I was like, okay. I actually had no plans to travel. I hadn't even thought about it, and I just thought, oh well, I'm not really doing much, so I thought, okay. And so Mum actually lent me, I didn't have any money, so Mum actually lent me some money to get the ticket over. So I flew home to see Mum, and then flew to America to see my sister, who was a nurse and who'd gone to live in America. I stayed with her, and then I flew to England and I stayed over there with my friend, and we started travelling, and we decided to go to her grandmother was English, obviously, and they lived in Liverpool. So we stayed there for a little while, and my girlfriend could go on the benefit, the dole, whatever they call that over there. So I didn't have much money. I think I had £80 in my pocket when I arrived in England without a return ticket. I don't even think you can do that these days. I don't even think you're allowed in with no return ticket and no money. But you can earn money to support yourself, like not support yourself, but to supplement your holiday. That wasn't exactly what I did, but I did actually work more than I probably should have. But we decided then to travel down to London and join an agency, a work agency, and we got some work working in some pubs. So we worked in pubs in London, and then my girlfriend and I, we did some travelling where we would work and then just go on holidays, and we went to the beer festival and things like that. And then we sort of lost touch because I can't remember what happened, but she went back to stay with us. Her grandmother and I went to work with a different agency, and I ended up living in as help in people's homes. And I did that for a short term with like short stays where the agency would say, oh, you've got to go here for 2 weeks. So I'd get on a train and I'd arrive in a strange place. It was a good way to see the country. You know, I'd arrive in a strange place and someone would pick me up and go, you're Jane? And I said, yeah. And then they'd pick me up and they'd drive me to this place. And now when I think about it, I think, oh, it could have been just anybody picking me up. But you just sort of don't even think about that when you're young. So I did that for a little while. So I got to meet different people. There was people who were very wealthy. I looked after someone while she convalesced after an operation. So I looked after her dogs. I prepped her meals. And then she would just cook them for her family. And I'd just be sort of invisible in the house and had to sort of stay in an area away from them. It was sort of my first encounter of the class system in England, because New Zealand, they don't really have that. I mean, there's very wealthy people, but you don't really see them as... It's a little bit different now in New Zealand, but back then it wasn't, you didn't really sort of notice that people had lots and lots of money, but in England it was very obvious that it was like a class system where, oh, you're like the hired help, so you don't sit with us, you don't...
Keep yourself separate.
Yeah. I realised one night when I was watching TV, they were watching the same TV in the other room, and I sort of came in and went, oh, you're watching what I'm watching? I sat down and it was like I could have cut the air with a knife. I felt so... I was like, oh, okay. Well, anyway, good night. See ya. It was obvious that I wasn't really meant to be in there with them, so I certainly got the idea pretty quickly to find what my place was, but I was only there for a few weeks. And then I went and stayed I was a housekeeper with a retired opera singer, and that was in Eastbourne, a place called Eastbourne. And when I got there, she said, because I didn't drive. I'd had a motorbike license, but I hadn't got my full license, so I was only a learner in New Zealand, so I could get around, but I didn't need to get my car license. And when I got there, she was like, your driver, and I said, well, I haven't got my driver's license. She said, oh, they were meant to send me someone with a driver's license. And so she wasn't real happy at first anyway. So she drove, and then I wish I had drove, because she was like 80 and I thought we were going to die. So, but that was interesting. And she lived in a house that had things in England were so old, that's what used to amaze me. She had an old church that was the original church, like from like centuries ago. And so on Christmas and special times, the church down the road, her church, would come and do services in the back of her house. And the church in the back of her house was like it was made out of rock and sand. It was just amazing, or sand, like stone and stuff. It was a little bit creepy. It used to freak me out a bit, because it was a bit, I don't know, it sort of made me think like it was haunted or something. It was just... used to freak me out a bit. But anyway, I was her housekeeper come companion come chef come, but there was still that feeling of I was the hired help, like that I get up and do this, and I need you to cook me this and set the table this way, and okay, now you can. But I didn't feel too bad. She was quite nice. But one day she got me when we all went to have Christmas lunch with her family, and it was like, oh, Maureen will the next door neighbour, she'll come over and have a cup of tea with you, and she's just going to come over and have a cup of tea. And so I had to wait on them hand and foot, and then we went to the Christmas lunch, and she was like offering me up to do the dishes, and that like I was her servant, and that because I was getting paid heaps anyway to be there for Christmas Day, that they should utilise my services. So I felt a bit bad then, and I think her family felt a bit awkward, because they were really lovely, and I think they were like, oh, Grandma, you're a bit of a... That's not very nice. So, but other than that, it was good. I got to see a lot of the country, and it was a good way to... And then I settled in a place called Lewis, and I was there for most of my time then. looking after an elderly lady. I lived in the house, and there was also a housekeeper, so I was like the live-in companion. And the housekeeper, her and her husband lived underneath, and I used to have to just be in the house like so someone was present. So if anything happened in the night, and she was quite wealthy, and she had what probably would be called dementia or Alzheimer's. She couldn't remember. She didn't really know who I was. She just thought because I was there all the time I was a familiar person, and so I used to have to try and talk very English. So I'd walk in the room, she'd go, "Oh, hello," and I'd be, "Hello, how are you?" And I'd say, "I'll just get you a drink," and I'd go into the kitchen and come back out, and she'd be like, "Hello," and she'd done a lot of travelling, and she was obviously quite elderly, but she needed help. She didn't really actually need my help. She could get around at night and stuff, but she'd quite often have accidents and things, and I had to clean that up and through the night without. She was totally unaware, of what was going on. But the housekeeper, she'd come and relieve me while I went to the shopping, so I'd have to cook food and stuff for her. But I stayed there, and they kept me on. They liked just to have the same person there all the time, just for continuity for her, even though she really didn't know who I was. I think at one point she did realise I had an accent, so she sort of had this thing about the Antipodeans and that she thought they were a bit beneath her. And she'd done so much travelling, the housekeeper used to come and read her the French newspaper. So she was quite... But she had an old house, lovely house, but... So I stayed there and travelled, so I could work and then actually have holidays.
Oh, so you got to see.
Yeah,
see
so then
things.
I could go and travel, which that's the one regret about travelling, is that I wish I had more money when I went over, so I wouldn't have to work as much.
Didn't have to spend so much with other people and other
lives.
Yeah.
So I could have, but it was different. It was a different way of seeing the country. I experienced different people in England, so that was quite good.
Yeah, it was a different kind of travelling, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And obviously you ended up, back in Australia. What happened with that? You said you didn't like it in the first place. So what made you come back, and what made you stay?
I had prior to leaving Australia, did have another boyfriend, but he was in the Navy, so that was sort of one of those relationships, because he was away so much. It wasn't like I could not travel. So when I went to England, I did have a boyfriend, but it wasn't like I had a boyfriend, because he was always travelling too. So not that I was really that into it, but when my sister got engaged, the one who lives in America, it gave me a reason to come home, and I was sort of missing home, and I sort of, I wasn't really, I had no real reason to stay there anymore, and with my sister, and I think my time for staying in England, working and travelling, you only have 2 years at that point for a tourist visa to go travel in and out of England. So I was sort of coming to the end of that anyway. So my sister Susan was getting married, so she wanted me to be a bridesmaid. So I said, well, I'll come via America home, and I'll try on the bridesmaid's dress and keep going back to New Zealand then for your wedding. So that worked out good. So I went to see her. I had actually been able to go for Christmas one time when I was in England to see her for Christmas and then back to England. So I did get to see her a couple of times. Anyway, I did fly home to New Zealand for her wedding. So I flew back before she did, and then she came, and then I had my final fitting. And then after her wedding, then I came back to Australia, because obviously I still had that boyfriend in the Navy, but my sister in Australia, she was pregnant. Kate was pregnant, and she was going to have her baby, so I sort of was like going to be her live-in nanny and come back, and she was going to pay me, so she could go back to work. So that was what the plan was, and so I came back to live in Sydney. So my sister got married, then I left and came back here to live, and I sort of. She'd had my nephew already, and then when she'd had him and she was still at home, someone from one of her friends said that there was some job, because I think a lot of people thought that it was wrong that I should be 20-year-old should be going to stay home and look after someone else's baby, like their sister's baby. Yeah. So it was sort of, I think a lot of people were sort of like, you can't, so a few people were like, oh, well, they're looking for someone at my work. Oh. And so and I did go down and try doing bar work down the road from where my sister lived, but bar work in Australia was a lot different than bar work in England. It was, I didn't like it. It was the whole pub setup was different. So I thought, well, I won't be doing that. And so because I had to have some money, but my sister was going to pay me and I was going to be her live-in nanny. And I think that did upset my sister a lot, because I think she thought that was the plan, so then they could stay there and keep working, because she worked in the city and my brother-in-law worked for Armour Guard. And because I went to this job interview and I got this job at a place called Ace Cutters, that meant that they had to they didn't own, they were renting, but they had to then leave and go. They couldn't afford to stay in Sydney, they had to go, so they moved out to a place up the Central Coast and had to travel. So I think that was a bit, not that I was really very aware of it, but I realise now, looking back, that that probably caused a bit of more disruption than I realised. So, but when I went for my job interview, my husband-to-be was one of the people interviewing me, but I did go home and say to my brother-in-law that I've just met the man I'm going to marry, or I'm in love. I don't know, he might even be married, I don't even know. But I went home and said I'm in love. So it turned out that, so he interviewed me, but that turned out that I was always quite keen on him, but I didn't actually know if he was married or not. And then so I was used to have to play, he thought I was a bit wacko, and I was from New Zealand, so that was not a great
drawing point.
Not a great drawing point for him. He always didn't think people from New Zealand were his cup of tea. So, but so I did have to be a bit persuasive. I did try and play, like he used to like doing crosswords. So I did quite keen on doing crosswords with him. Not that he likes me doing them with him now, but so. Yeah, so I met my husband there, but we didn't start going out for a while because he was not played hard to get, but he was a bit hard to get. He was
oblivious.
I don't know if he was trying to make out he really didn't like me because I was from New Zealand. I don't know if he was sort of trying to convince himself that no, he didn't really like me. I don't know. So, yeah, so, sorry, I forgot what was the question.
So you stayed in New Zealand, in Australia, obviously, for your husband. So how did you guys, get together? Did he finally ask you out, or?
Oh, well, no, it sort of happened. We were sort of trying to, I don't know how did it work? I broke up. I had broken up with my boyfriend from the Navy, and he didn't take that very well. And but I really didn't. That sounds horrible. I really didn't care. So because I think because we didn't really spend much time together at all, it was sort of like he was only my boyfriend in word. It wasn't really. I don't know. It just wasn't really a relationship. But yeah, Mick was very, I don't know, shy, maybe not. I used to drop so many big hints, try to say, let's go play squash or something. He'd be like, I could never really pin him down, get him to commit to something. Or so we did sort of flirt quite a bit, but it wasn't, I don't know, it was hard.
Nothing really came of it.
Nothing really came of it. And then he did himself have an accident where he fell off a balcony, and he was in hospital. And he told me later that he thought I should have come in to see him, but I didn't wasn't able to get there anyway. But I didn't feel that, I don't know. I didn't really know how he really
where you stood,
where I stood anyway. So anyway, he came back to work and he was fine, but he'd given up smoking because that was always something he used to do. He smoked, and I just think, I didn't really like the idea that he smoked. Anyway, so that got sorted out because he stopped smoking because he fell off the balcony. So he did give up smoking. But I found out one time, because he used to go out drinking with his friends and stuff a lot, but I did find out that he was going out somewhere, so I just made sure I was there when he was going to be there. So I made my girlfriend. Yep. So I made my girlfriend go he was living with, we went from somewhere, I can't remember where we were, and then I said, oh, let's go down to Hill Street. So we went to Hill Street because I knew he was going to be there. So then I just honed in on him and just walked straight up to him. And then I said, what did I say? I said, I can't remember if I said it before or after I kissed him. I said, oh, you're not going to do it, so I'm going to do it or something. So I gave him a big kiss. He did have a mouthful of drink at the time, but it didn't matter. So I had to make the move. So
and now you've been what? How long? You had
26 years.
Anniversary the other day.
Yep, 26 years.
You've been married forever. And now you just live in Australia, work, have kids.
Yep. So I stayed in Australia and lived here and made my life here with Mick when we had 2 children, and then so now, unfortunately, it means I haven't been around with my mum, and so now I have to travel. I travel home to see her as much as I can, and she's elderly now. She's 86, so and that's the drawback, that I've had not been around my family as much. But that's what happens, I suppose.
Well, thanks for that, Jane. Very interesting story.